So I will be talking about solid waste management, floods, and land occupation in Maputo, in Mozambique. The first thing that I would like to do is a moment of reflection. I would like you all to look at this short video and thinking about what is trash to you and how whatever you're watching relates, if at all, to your daily life. And I'm gonna start the video now.
Mi nombre es Ada Maribel Ríos Bogado, tengo 13 años y toco el violín.
Me llamo Juan Manuel Chávez, más conocido como Baby, tengo 19 años y toco el cello. Este cello está hecho de una lata de aceite, la madera tirada en la basura y las clavijas son de una vieja cuchara para golpear la carne y para hacer el ñoquis. Y suena así.
Una comunidad como Cateura no es un lugar para tener un violín. De hecho, un violín cuesta más que su casa.
En ese grupo acá mismo encontramos el colador de violín. Y de ese empezamos los instrumentos reciclados. La familia que acá vive recicla todo lo que hay en la basura y se vende. No pensaba antes que yo voy a hacer ese instrumento. Y me siento demasiado feliz cuando estoy viendo a un niño que está tocando un violín reciclado.
Cuando ya escucho el sonido del violín, siento como mariposas en el estómago, así una sensación que no sé cómo voy a explicar.
Bueno, la orquesta de instrumentos reciclados es una orquesta que toca instrumentos hechos con la basura.
Mi vida sería, sin la música estaría por ahí.
La gente se da cuenta que no tenemos que tirar la basura muy fácilmente. Y no tenemos que desechar a las personas muy fácilmente.
¡Fuerte, fuerte!
Sorry, I'm having Okay, so now I wanted to start talking a bit of my research that is focused on solid waste management. That is one of the biggest environmental challenges for developing country cities, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. And as you can see in this graph, the projected waste generation by region is expected to increase tremendously between 2016, the blue line, and 2050. And this is especially the case in Sub-Saharan Africa, where waste generation is actually expected to triple as income rise and urban population is growing. Now, waste is not just a matter of having a clean city. Obviously, it's clogged drains usually exacerbate flooding and also a breeding ground for vector-based diseases like dengue and malaria, and for animals like rodents. When the waste is not collected, it's usually burnt, which often means a lot of respiratory infections. And then a lot of kids are playing in the streets and over mountains of trash, as we will see also in my presentation, which obviously carries a risk of injury. Now, in most countries, municipal governments are responsible for solid waste management. But in the countries which I normally work with, they have limited technical, financial, and institutional capacity. And in fact, typically in slums, primary waste collection is often inexistent. There is a lack of political commitment. It's costly to do it. You can imagine the difficulty for large trucks to enter very small roads. And it's obviously more challenging to organize a service in very dense urban context than it is in well-planned part of the cities. So typically when solid waste solid waste collection is provided in slums, we tend to see the involvement of the small private sector or of NGOs and community-based organizations, with the idea that the government is unable to do this sort of provision and it's expensive for the government. And so these private players can give a hand. Now, all these setups usually see waste as a manageable object, so something that can be dealt with using technical or institutional solutions. And in fact, technical solutions are particularly sexy, especially for municipalities in developing country, with this whole idea that they want to become a global city. And so technology needs to be part of the way services are provided. Now, few models of solid waste delivery have actually been evaluated in slums, and success has been very scant, in fact, very limited in slums. Now, there is an exception here in Maputo. Maputo is actually the capital of Mozambique. It's a very typical Sub-Saharan African city. It has experienced rapid population growth. 1 million, it went from 1.7 to 2.7 million in 10 years. About 1/4 of the city population lives below the poverty line. So in Maputo, the Municipality of Maputo established in 2005 44 contracts with 44 different microenterprise, one for every of its outskirts neighbors. So not all these neighbors are slum, but many are. And this model that I will be talking about today is definitely a low-tech model, but it's also known at least in the continent, to be a very successful one. So the research questions that I will address is, how does this successful solid waste arrangement work in a typical slum of Maputo? And what are the factors that explain its functioning or lack of thereof? My study site is a particular neighborhood within the city, which you see in this map in the green circle. It's called Ferroviario. In many respects, it's a typical slum. Part of it is located on a steep terrain. Another part is actually low-lying and flood-prone. It was heavily impacted by the floods in 2000 and 2016. It's also a neighborhood with high poverty. Between 37 and 57% of the households live below the poverty line. As you can see, this is not among the poorest neighborhood, which in this map are in actually red. And you can see that the neighborhood is closely located as compared to downtown, which is the green part of this map, but that's the colonial city. That's what the richest part of Maputo. For the population of Maputo's neighborhoods, this is actually a large neighborhood. It's about 50,000 people, but it's not very high density actually. And it's actually one of the neighborhoods where poverty has decreased the most between 1997 and 2007. And it's pretty non-homogeneous in many respects. There is a rising middle class in some parts of it. And also when it comes to cleanliness, we have very dirty areas, like you can see in the screen, and also much cleaner areas. So it's really not homogeneous. So my data collection included about 200 hours of observation. This is following waste collection, so following the waste and hanging out where the waste is deposited in the large containers, which we will see soon. About 50 long interviews with households and many shorter ones during conversation, some of which were conducted in Portuguese, which is a language I speak fluently, and some others in Shangana, which is not a language I'm fluent in, so I was accompanied by my research assistant. I did interview microenterprise leadership and workers, and 10 key informants. These were important to understand how and why the solid waste management system was set up the way it was, and to go back in history. And then I did spatial analysis of data collected via transit walks and Google Earth. So before I start presenting my finding, I just wanted to give a bit of context about how this system works. So first of all, I said before, the Municipality of Maputo established 44 contracts, one with each microenterprise. So we have 44 microenterprises that are responsible for primary waste collection in 44 neighborhoods. In the case of Ferroviario, you can see that the neighborhood is divided in 3 parts, and every neighborhood each part of the neighborhood has solid waste collection 2 days a week. So 2 days in Zone B, 2 days in Zone A, and 2 days in Zone C. And each microenterprise is responsible for door-to-door waste collection, and then for disposing the waste in larger containers. So I'm just going to show you how this works. So the solid waste gets picked up at people's home. You can see the big bag of solid waste. Then it's loaded on a pushcart. You can see this pushcart is quite full. The pushcart, when it's full, the pushcart is going to a large container that is located at the entrance of the neighborhood or within the neighborhood, but where the road is large enough to accommodate a truck picking it up. And then the large container is taken away by one private contractor of the municipality. This is a private contractor that goes to the 44 neighborhoods to pick up this large container. And you can see in the picture here that is exchanging one empty container. We're going to talk about why that's happening with another empty container. In theory, obviously the container that gets exchanged should be full. Once the large container is picked up, is brought to the landfill, which is located in the middle of the city in a Maputo peri-urban areas, about 15 minutes from where Ferroviario is located. There are a couple of important elements to this system that we need to understand. Is that households are paying for solid waste collection in Maputo. They're paying a fixed fee that is part of their electricity bill, but this fixed fee is not enough. So they're also, the municipal budget also is paying for part of the service. And the system is designed to be working in a municipality which has very limited finance. And in fact, the whole idea of the system was that they wanted to maintain the cost of solid waste collection as easy to forecast or as fixed as possible, because they cannot afford to pay for more than the amount of money that this system was set up to be costing at the beginning. And also they wanted to protect the system from corruption and politics. So let me be clear here. So what's happening here is that the microenterprise are not paid on the base of the quantity of trash that they collect, or even on the quality of service that they provide. They're paid according to the population size of the neighborhood. And second, the waste collector, the private provider that goes to the 44 neighborhoods, is paid not per weight, but by trip that he makes to the landfill. This means that there are a lot of empty containers that are traveling to the landfill because the private contractor is not paid for how much waste is inside, but just per trip. And these decisions were made because in this way, there is no weighting of the waste at arrival, which isolates the system from a lot of corruption, as you can imagine. The last few elements before we talk about my findings is that microenterprises actually have a limited purview in these neighborhoods when it comes to solid waste collection, because market, streets, and drainage are not under the responsibility of the municipality. In fact, you can see here a lady cleaning the street in front of her house. And private businesses like restaurants need to contract other private providers, not the municipal one, the municipal enterprise, to pick up their trash. Okay, so just to remind you, I was asking myself, how does this successful solid waste arrangement work, and what are the factors that explain its functioning or lack thereof? So the first thing that we need to understand, and this is again a map of Ferroviario, is that the containers of the municipality are actually not the only place where trash is dumped. So my research on the ground showed that yes, there are 8 containers of the municipality, but there are also 5 illegal dump sites, and on the top of some really dispersed waste along roads. And I want to point your attention to the fact that in one part of the neighborhood that there are absolutely no containers. We're going to talk about this later. I also want to give you a sense of how these illegal dumpsters look like. For the majority, they're like huge craters, and they are in the middle of the neighborhood. You can even see them on Google Earth. You can see how big they are. And the other thing that I want you to notice is that they're still far from being full. And it is in blue that you can see with the pushcarts are the microenterprise workers. So this is not just used by the population, but it's also used by the microenterprise. The service in this neighborhood is actually, and this is my second finding, is actually used by only some of these residents. So we know that everybody that has electricity is paying, and which is essentially 100% of households in this neighborhood is paying for the service. But actually, the service is used only by some residents. And this is in part because the service is not provided everywhere, and also because the service is not really reliable. So let me show you. These are 5, this map is the same map we have seen before. And these are the 500 meters buffer around the containers and the dumpsters. And as what we really realized is that people that lived around the containers and the dumpsters did not use the service of the microenterprise. In fact, the microenterprise has even stopped collecting waste around the containers because they say there is no demand. Now, there are also some residents that are really not benefiting from the service because of typical challenges that you would expect of service provision in slums. Slopes and sandy terrains are very difficult to handle for pushcarts. You can see here there are 3 people trying to push forward these pushcarts that got stuck. There is also the case that these pushcarts are actually often deviated or used for other uses. So a lot of these microenterprises provide also solid waste collection services in markets, and it's much more financially viable to do that in markets. And so they often take the carts to use them in the market. And I think it's important that we realize that these microenterprises are also very vulnerable to the party calls. So this would be a case in which Ferroviario is not far from downtown Maputo, and the mayor of Maputo is interested in getting the beach clean, and so he calls the microenterprise and orders them to clean the beach rather than cleaning these neighborhoods. And finally, last but not least, is that there is a rule that if the containers are full, large containers are full, then the microenterprise should not pick up trash in people's home because they don't know where to put it. So it's often the case that the microenterprise does not work because the large containers have not been picked up. Oftentimes they're picked up in places where they are really visible. So I'm going to show you this map again, and you can see the green borders of the neighborhood. Those are large roads. And those municipal containers are much more likely to be picked up than, say, municipal container number 6, which is located in the middle of the neighborhood. So we're now going to move from supply issues. So I talked about the microenterprise having issues to supply the service, to issues related to demand. And in particular, I will talk about the fact that this service does really not meet the demand of the middle class or not so poor households. And just to remind us that this service was set up in 2005 when poverty was much more widespread. But 15 years later, it has not changed in the characteristics, and it's really not meeting demand of the middle class or the not so poor households. And also, I wanted to point out that it does not meet the demand of those who consider solid waste as filth or solid waste as a resource. Some consider solid waste a commodity. I'm not going to be focusing on this today, but I can take questions if it's of interest. So let's start from how and why the service does not meet the demand of the middle class. Well, if you are in the middle class, you in Maputo at this moment, you usually are a car owner. So you load your trash on the car and throw it away on the way to work. So you're not going to wait for the microenterprise to pass by. In fact, it's hard for you to do that because you can't really leave the trash on the street for long. It's not allowed, otherwise animals might get into it, and you have to go to work. So you're just going to take the car and take the trash with you and throw it away on the way to work. You can see here somebody that has a small van that is doing that, even though the container is actually here very full. If you have a helper or a maid, you'll have your maid going to the container so that you don't have to worry about it. And if you have a bit more money, you also might want to hire a private provider. If you have a lot of trash, and there are a lot of young unemployed people in these neighborhoods, and so they're hired as a private provider of this service on a daily basis. Now, the second thing we need to talk about is the fact that the service really does not meet the demand of those who consider solid waste as filth. So here, there are a lot of households who really have, no patience to keep the solid waste. And you can imagine, that there is a lot of wet waste because these are poor communities where most of the waste is actually wet. And especially when it's hot, the smell is really bad. People are also very aware that flies carry disease. And they're particularly worried of having trash lying around that might attract, mosquitoes especially. There are animals living in this neighborhood, dogs, but also chickens, and they might go through the waste and make a real mess. And remember that if the road gets dirty in front of somebody's house, that's the responsibility of the household to take care. And children might also play near or with the waste. So, if you leave, if you don't need to wait, you don't. And those who live a short walk distance from the container or the dumping site, just go. It's a small benefit. There's a small effort with large benefits to walk your trash to the big container. And there is also a more cultural issue here, which is those who have kids that want to show that they're educating their kids actually send their kids to throw away the trash. So it's very, very common to see kids going multiple times a day to dispose of the trash. And you can see one in this picture. This is clearly not full, but the child was sent by his parents, and this is considered a way to show that you're well educating your children. Now, the last thing that I really want to talk about is the fact that the service does really not meet the demand of those who consider waste as a resource. And in particular here, I want to bring your attention to two different issues. One is the use of waste as a resource to reclaim urban space, and in particular to reclaim roads, public space, and private land that was lost. And a second way in which waste is used in this neighborhood is to claim new land or agricultural land that can be inhabited. So let me explain a bit more. Let's start from waste that is used as a resource to reclaim urban space. So here you can see the example of two roads. Both of these roads have been highly affected by erosion. As you can see, the houses were built at much higher. In fact, when it rains, these are like almost rivers. In this case, the waste is left on the floor because it's essentially used to rebuild the road. And this is particularly the case of the sloped street throughout the neighborhood. And you can see here that this woman on the right is trying to fight erosion. That's her front yard is all, the cement is all getting broken. And so she has burnt some waste inside her home, and she's bringing the ashes to kind of stabilize her front porch that is really suffering from erosion. I want to show you this large pit and how space was reclaimed around it. This is a large pit that was actually used by the municipality to get sand to build roads that connected the central part, the cement city or the colonial city, to the rest of Maputo. And it was a particularly active sand mine in 1980s. At the time, the sand pit or the crater was much smaller. And in fact, next to the pit, there were large roads that were accessible by the trucks that were picking up the sand to bring it and use it for construction. Well, it turns out that the floods of 2000 and 2016 completely destroyed all the roads and a lot of houses that were around these craters. And so you can see here in this picture, you can see the color of the sand as being darker. You in fact can see a red circle inside which you can see there is a new house that was built and some new sand that was put. That's because in that part of the crater, there is enough trash to actually being, it's quite compact, and now inhabitants believe that that part is ready to be reclaimed and used. So in this case, now there is a road. You can see another example here. This is another part around this crater, and you can see how this road is now perfectly, it's large enough for cars to go through. It looks all sandy and well done. Well, it turns out that the sand was bought by the two households that you see on the two sides of the road, and all under it is trash. In fact, if you see, there is a pole, and to the right side of the screen, you can see that there is here, this is still part of the crater. So we're really close to the crater, even if it does not really look like. So you may ask, why is the problem of these large dumping sites not addressed? And I would say, first of all, it's not an easy problem to solve. Some of these craters are really large and they need municipal intervention. But the municipality doesn't have the equipment that is needed to sort out this problem. It lacks willingness to do it, and also kind of financial capacity. Not only the equipment is expensive, but also sand. Sand is very expensive and needs to be imported for the most part. The second point is that the presence of these dumping sites is actually a benefit to many. If you think about, households don't need to worry about walking large distances to the municipal containers, don't need to wait about worrying about the service to be provided. They can get rid of their waste as quickly and easily. It's also good for the micro enterprises. They have less clients to deal with. Remember that they are paid by number of clients, but still, in this way they have less clients. They don't need to go to get to the containers from the municipality. They can just get to the dumpsters that often are closer. So that's less pushing for them. It's very tiring to push one of those carts. And, if one of the containers is full, dumpsters actually present alternatives, and it's quicker for them to dispose of waste. And finally, it's important to remind ourselves, this is something I haven't not touched upon in this presentation, but Mozambique is experiencing a very serious economic crisis, and since 2006, and many citizens actually are using trash and as a commodity, and they're waste pickers. They easily access the waste that goes into these dumpsters and then resell it. So, it's often the case that when the micro enterprise and even privates bring their waste, there are a bunch of people running after the trucks or the push carts to see what's inside. So in conclusion, I want to talk briefly about water resource water as a resource to claim a new urban space. And the claim I'm gonna make right now is that we really need to think about how solid waste was used to create new land where people could live, and land that was affordable in a context in which land is actually something that doesn't exist anymore unless you travel 2 or 3 hours outside the city, at least at affordable price. So we need to go back to that part of the neighborhood of Ferroviario, which is called actually Minguene, which doesn't have any containers. And so what we need to see is what is happening in this part of the neighborhood. So what my claim here is that solid waste has facilitated urban expansion that has occurred in the last 20 years in this part of the neighborhood of Ferroviario. And you can see here the difference between Minguene in 2000 and Minguene in 2019. And particularly, you can see that we see densification in areas that were already built in 2000, but also a lot of occupation of new land that was previously used for agriculture. This is especially the case near the agricultural strip that you see in the middle of the neighborhood, and in this part that connects the two parts of Ferroviario, and more and more also in the southern part of the neighborhood. You can also see that a new high-income complex or gated community was built here on the right side. Now, this map shows that 44% of Minguene actually urbanized between 2000 and 2019. This is by looking at the areas that became non-green from being green in 2000. And solid waste, I argue, played a major enabling role. I want to show you how this works. So these are two different cases. So on the left, we see a sign that says solid waste here. This is the case of somebody that doesn't live on this land yet and is asking his neighbors to leave the solid waste that they have there so that this person can use it. This is different from the photo you see on the right, where you see a small house already built. In this case, this person is expanding their house and building a latrine. And so here, the way this works is that this person has made a deal with his neighbors and has asked his neighbors to bring him the waste so that he can use it to build. This is a picture that shows that the microenterprise is also involved. Actually, the microenterprise gets paid by the inhabitants of this part of Ferroviario to bring them a large quantity of waste at once. This is the same house that I just showed you. This part where the microenterprise workers are is the latrine. And as you can see, there is a part of this yard where the waste is already compacted with rubbles of sand and stones. So essentially the waste, there is already enough waste, and the household has already bought sand and stones to compact it and make it pretty, and then has built on it a house, which you can see, and a latrine, which you also can see. And whereas the other part of the yard is actually still under construction, and you can see that the waste is yet to be compacted. In fact, this lady was telling the microenterprise that she wants to speed up, she has money to buy sand, and she needs the microenterprise to bring trash. Now, this is definitely not a stable or safe way to build. You can see here that sometimes, there are large objects underneath, and this is clearly not a way that allows for durable construction. So I think in my conclusion, I want to finish by saying that planning for service improvements at the neighborhood level is actually difficult in this context where slums are highly heterogeneous. You can think about the heterogeneity in physical condition that may require, alternatives to pushcarts. Sandy and slope terrains are not good for pushcarts. And also households' economic conditions evolved, and we need to plan for that. We also need to understand demand, and particularly, I would argue, multiple conceptions of solid waste, which, I think it's important that we realize that in this story, some of our stakeholders believed that waste was a manageable object to get rid of. And this is the case of the local authority, the municipal authority, the microenterprises, and the households that live in the richer and flatter areas of the neighborhood. For others, waste is really just filth, For others, again, it was a commodity. I told you that both the microenterprise workers sold the waste to those that needed it, and households often picked the waste and sold it on. But also for some households, waste is really a resource they don't want to get rid of, that they really want to keep. And we need to think about the households that live on the flood-prone areas, where there is a lot of water that they need to deal with, or steep terrain. But also local authorities that are really benefiting from land transactions. If you think about in this part of Ferroviario that now is not agricultural anymore, a lot of land has been purchased, and every time a piece of land is purchased, local authorities really benefit. So with this, I would like to end my presentation, and I would like to spend a minute or two thinking about what you learned today that is relevant to your own research or practice. And after that, we're gonna, I'm gonna take your questions, and if you want to talk a bit about pedagogy.